The microwave? A total accident. So were tea bags, Post-it notes, and even that little pink sweetener on your cafe table. Some of the most world-changing inventions weren't born out of genius planning, they were pure, beautiful mistakes. From spilled chemicals to misunderstood instructions, these accidental discoveries reshaped history. Curious how a dye, a dinner, and a fluorescent glow ended up changing everything? Let's dive into the world of genius gone wrong. Mauvain. In the mid-1800s, fashion was uninspired. Clothing mostly came in dull tones, browns, beiges, and blues that faded fast and lacked flair. At the time, dyes were made from natural sources like plants and insects, and while beautiful, they were expensive, hard to produce, and prone to fading. That all changed, completely by accident, thanks to an 18-year-old chemistry student named William Perkin. Perkin was working in his lab trying to synthesize quinine, the only known treatment for malaria. Quinine was expensive and hard to source, so creating a synthetic version would have been a scientific breakthrough. But instead of ending up with medicine, Perkin produced a thick, sticky, purplish-black sludge. Not exactly a Nobel Prize moment. Still, curious about this unexpected mess, he decided to test it on a piece of silk. And that's when it happened. The silk turned a stunning shade of violet, bright, rich, and most importantly, permanent. Unlike natural dyes, it didn't fade with washing or wear. Perkin had accidentally created the world's first synthetic dye. He named it Mauvain, inspired by the French word mauve for the pale purple flower mallow. Mauvain took Europe by storm. The color exploded across fashion circles, worn by royalty and commoners alike. Queen Victoria herself was spotted in mauve. Perkin capitalized on the frenzy by opening a dye factory, setting the stage for the modern chemical industry. His discovery didn't just change how clothes looked, it laid the foundation for synthetic advances in medicine, cosmetics, textiles, and even photography. It's wild to think that a mistake in a chemistry lab, an 18-year-old's oops, ended up reshaping the global dye industry and revolutionizing how we use color. So yes, a failed attempt to fight malaria ended up changing fashion forever. And if you think purple dye was a big deal, wait till you see how a bad glue ended up on everyone's desk. Post-it notes. Imagine being assigned to invent the world's strongest adhesive, something that could hold up under pressure, weather, and time. That was the goal Spencer Silver had in mind back in 1968, while working as a chemist at 3M. But instead of developing an industrial-strength glue, he accidentally created something very different. A low-tack adhesive that stuck lightly to surfaces, peeled off cleanly, and left no residue behind. By most standards, it was a total failure. It didn't do what glue was supposed to do. It wasn't strong, it wasn't permanent. It wasn't even clear how anyone might use it. For years, the invention sat on the shelf at 3M. Interesting, but useless. Then came Art Fry, one of Silver's colleagues at 3M, who also happened to sing in his church choir. He had a very specific problem. The bookmarks in his hymnal kept slipping out. That's when he remembered Spencer's strange glue. What if he used that adhesive on paper bookmarks that would stay in place, but could also be removed without damaging the pages? That simple insight turned everything around. The two teamed up to create what we now know as Post-it notes, a small, sticky-backed piece of paper that could be repositioned easily. They refined the product, tested it internally, and eventually convinced 3M to try it in the market. The first trials were a hit. People didn't just like Post-its, they became obsessed with them. Fast forward to today. Post-it notes are everywhere. Offices, classrooms, refrigerators, mirrors, laptops, any surface that needs a quick reminder or a burst of brainstorming energy. They've become a symbol of productivity, creativity, and organization. And they all came from a glue that was never meant to succeed. It's a reminder that not every failure is a dead end. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right problem to solve. Next up is another everyday essential, born when someone misunderstood how to make a cup of tea. Tea bags. Tea bags, believe it or not, were never meant to exist. Their invention wasn't the result of years of planning or research. It came from a simple packaging decision and a whole lot of assumptions. The story begins in the early 1900s with an American tea merchant named Thomas Sullivan, who was trying to cut down on shipping costs. At the time, tea was typically sold loose and packed in metal tins, which were expensive, heavy, and not the most convenient to send as samples. Sullivan thought he'd be clever and package his tea in small, individual silk pouches instead. The plan was for clients to open the bags, pour the leaves into their usual infusers, and brew the tea as they always had. But something unexpected happened. Instead of emptying the tea out of the pouches, some of his clients simply dunked the entire bag into hot water. Maybe they didn't read the instructions. Maybe they thought this was some new brewing method, but regardless of the reason, it worked. The silk allowed water to pass through, steeping the leaves and creating a clean, flavorful cup of tea, without any of the mess. When Sullivan began receiving feedback, he realized that his accidental invention was being used in a completely different way, and people loved it. There was no need for strainers, no wet leaves to clean up, and no fuss. Just pop the bag in, pull it out, and you're done. Seeing the opportunity, Sullivan quickly adapted. He switched from silk to gauze and later to paper, creating versions of the tea bag that were cheaper, more practical, and even easier to manufacture at scale. As word spread and demand grew, other companies jumped on board, refining and improving the design. Fast forward to today, and tea bags are an everyday staple. Whether it's a morning ritual, a late-night wind-down, or a midday break, billions of people around the world now rely on this little invention. In fact, over 100 billion tea bags are used globally every year, all because one merchant wanted to save on shipping. It's a perfect example of how innovation sometimes comes from the people using the product, not the person making it. A misunderstanding that turned into a movement. An error that became an industry. And speaking of seeing things differently, let's talk about a guy who discovered invisible rays by accident. X-rays. Wilhelm Röntgen wasn't trying to change the world. He wasn't chasing a medical breakthrough or solving a major scientific problem. He was simply running routine experiments on cathode rays one evening in 1895, tinkering with a vacuum tube covered in black cardboard. But then, something strange happened. As he passed an electric current through the tube, a fluorescent screen across the room suddenly began to glow. The tube was sealed. No visible light should have escaped. Röntgen was intrigued. Curious and methodical, he began placing various objects between the tube and the screen. Books, metal, wood, and noticed something fascinating. Some objects blocked the mysterious rays, others let them through. The glowing continued. Then came the moment that changed everything. He held his hand between the tube and the screen. What he saw was his own skeleton. More specifically, he saw the bones of his hand and the outline of his wedding ring projected in eerie detail onto the screen. It was as if he had discovered a new form of vision, one that could see through flesh. Röntgen had accidentally discovered a completely unknown form of radiation, which he later named X-rays, with X symbolizing the unknown. Realizing the importance of what he had stumbled upon, he spent weeks documenting the phenomenon in secret before finally publishing his findings. The impact was immediate. Within just months, doctors across Europe and the United States began using X-rays to view inside the human body without surgery, a revolutionary advancement for medical diagnostics. From locating bullets to detecting bone fractures, X-rays rapidly became one of the most valuable tools in medicine. And all of it started with a sealed vacuum tube, a glowing screen, and a very observant scientist. Röntgen received the very first Nobel Prize in Physics in 1901 for this discovery. But he never patented the technology, believing it belonged to the world. Today, X-rays are used not just in hospitals, but in security, astronomy, engineering, and materials science. One accidental glow in a dark lab turned into a global revolution in how we see the unseen. It's a story of curiosity, patience, and a willingness to chase the strange. Now, get ready for a story that starts with a dinner and ends with dessert-level sweetness. Saccharin. You know those little pink sweetener packets at diners and coffee shops? The ones labeled 0 calorie or sugar-free. Their origin story doesn't start with a health trend. It starts with coal tar, a tired chemist, and a very unexpected dinner. In 1878, Russian chemist Konstantin Fahlberg was working at Johns Hopkins University, experimenting with coal tar derivatives. Yes, actual coal tar. It wasn't as strange back then as it sounds now. Coal tar was a common base for chemical research at the time. and Fahlberg was studying its potential compounds for industrial uses. After a long day in the lab, Fahlberg went home for dinner without washing his hands. As he ate, he noticed something weird. His bread tasted sweet. Odd. Then he touched his fingers and realized they tasted sweet too. That's when it hit him. It wasn't the food. It was something he had brought home from the lab. Fahlberg rushed back to the lab the next morning and began testing every compound he had worked on that day. Eventually, he isolated the culprit, benzoic sulfonide, a substance with a shockingly sweet taste. Several hundred times sweeter than regular sugar, but with no calories. Just like that, he had stumbled upon saccharin, the world's first artificial sweetener. At the time, sugar was a luxury for many, and saccharin's potential as a cheaper alternative was immediately clear. Fahlberg wasted no time. He patented the compound and began producing it commercially, drawing both interest and controversy. Sugar manufacturers were not pleased. They launched public campaigns questioning the safety of saccharin and fought hard against its adoption. But the market spoke louder. Saccharin found its place not just as a sugar substitute, but as a breakthrough product, especially during war times and sugar shortages. Over the years, it appeared in everything from diet sodas and toothpaste to medications and chewing gum. And yes, science has evolved, and so have sweeteners. But saccharin paved the way. It showed that a random mistake, a pair of unwashed hands, and a curious mind could change how the world tastes its food. Literally. From coal tar to coffee shop tables, saccharin proved that even a messy lab day can lead to something remarkably sweet. Who knew a misused glue, an unwashed hand, and a glowing screen could change the world? These discoveries weren't planned, but thank goodness they happened. So the next time something goes wrong, remember, it might just be the start of something big. Which one surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. We'll see you in the next one, where we tell you about even more surprising inventions. Don't forget to subscribe to watch the upcoming part 2. See you there.